On August 22, 2016, police stopped a silver BMW on the M5. Inside the boot, a bag. In the passenger seat, a child, silent. 3 months later in Birmingham, a lorry of frozen chicken arrived at a storage unit. But this delivery carried more than food. 2 ordinary places, 1 criminal network worth millions. This is the story of the Midlands drugs empire and how it was finally exposed. At the centre of the operation was Nazarat Hussain, 36, from Great Bar. He was the organiser. He travelled frequently to the Netherlands, building ties with suppliers, setting up the paperwork that disguised their runs as legitimate trade. His role was to keep the Dutch side moving, arranging the orders, liaising with the handlers, and making sure the drugs were concealed before the loads were sent on. Back in Britain, others were ready to receive what arrived. Alongside him stood Hussein, 34, from Handsworth. Though they shared a surname, the 2 men were not related. Wasim acted as a co-ring leader, handling communication and day-to-day coordination, particularly when Naz was abroad. Reports later described him as easily influenced, a man who still found himself holding responsibility in an international conspiracy. The operation relied on trusted hands within the Midlands. Mohammed Shahir, 42, ran a meat supply business in Small Heath. His company provided cover for the consignments, crates of frozen chicken delivered as part of his trade, but hiding Class A drugs deep inside. Then there were the brothers Manjinder and Davinder Singh Tarkar, both from Smethwick. They moved goods once they reached the UK, driving shipments across the Midlands, even transporting raw chicken without refrigeration. Their role may have seemed simple, moving loads from one location to another, but it was essential to keeping the network running. Further out, the network needed couriers it believed were invisible. Adnan Ahmed Malik, a taxi driver from Edgbust, became one of those players. His involvement came during a later stage when the gang switched methods and turned to Heathrow Airport. We will talk about it later. The Dutch side of the conspiracy brought in new names. Shazad Butt, 34, arranged the concealment of Class A inside chicken loads. He worked with Dominique Anthony Ventura da Costa, 36, who provided a warehouse where the consignments were prepared before being shipped to Britain. Without their work overseas, the UK side would have had nothing to collect. Other figures circled the network. Kam Hussein was tried but acquitted of being part of the organised crime group. At Heathrow, separate prosecutions drew in Vaughan Anthony Henry from London, Dev Anand from Slough, and Grant and Delano Samuels, also from London, all connected to the airside operation. And when investigators widened their net to the firearms strand, they found Khalid Subhan and Abed Hussein, men convicted in linked weapons offences. Together, these names formed a web that stretched from Birmingham to Rotterdam, from Heathrow to Dutch warehouses, but each was part of a chain that allowed hundreds of kilos of heroin and cocaine to move under the radar. The operation was built to look legitimate. From the summer of 2016, the gang created a series of front companies across the Midlands. Each had official-looking paperwork, registered addresses, email accounts, and contact details that gave the appearance of wholesale meat suppliers. On paper, they were part of the everyday trade in frozen food moving between the Netherlands and Britain. Shipments were arranged through genuine shipping firms, ensuring that lorries carrying the goods blended in with countless others leaving Rotterdam. Crates of poultry were stacked, labelled, and loaded like any other order. Distribution hubs received the deliveries, and the consignments were collected by members of the group once they reached the UK. The system gave the gang cover to anyone on the outside. These were routine food imports, but within those crates, Class A drugs were hidden in bulk, layered and concealed so that the consignment passed inspection until officers knew where to look. It was a model designed to be resilient, Each time investigators seized a load, the gang simply incorporated a new company using a fresh name and address to continue the trade. In total, there were 3 separate fronts established in little over a year. The cycle was always the same: set up a new identity, ship in another consignment, and move it on quickly once it reached the UK. The National Crime Agency would later estimate the scale of these efforts. We will talk about it in a few minutes. It was a system that relied on routine. On the surface, nothing stood out. That was the strength of the cover story until the consignments began to fall apart under closer scrutiny. The cover story of chicken imports was simple, but its execution was precise. The first major breakthrough came in November 2016, when officers intercepted a shipment from the Netherlands. Inside the pallets, 22 kilograms of Class A were recovered. The find confirmed suspicions. The chicken crates were not just food deliveries, but vehicles for drugs worth millions once broken down for sale. It was not an isolated event. Over the following months, 2 further consignments were seized, each concealed in the same way. In total, the 3 shipments carried heroin and cocaine with a combined street value of around 5 million. Each consignment had passed through official ports collected like any other wholesale order before officers moved in with targeted intelligence. The packaging was consistent. Blocks were sealed, pressed, and hidden amongst the frozen poultry, designed to be hard to detect without forensic inspection. For investigators, the method revealed the calculated nature of the operation. This was not improvised smuggling. It was a repeatable process structured to look legitimate and run at scale. But while 3 loads were seized, the wider picture was far larger. When analysts pieced together shipping records, they traced 19 separate importations connected to the gang between June 2016 and mid-2017. Of these, only 3 were intercepted. The remaining 16 shipments were never recovered, but experts judged that they almost certainly contained the same hidden cargo. By their calculations, as much as 300 to 350 kilograms of Class A drugs had entered the UK through this route. Each time a seizure was made, the response from the organisers was immediate. As we discussed earlier, for investigators, the seizures confirm the scale of the problem. For the gang, they were setbacks to be absorbed, managed by shifting names and starting again. The poultry method had proven effective, but its exposure forced them to adapt, leading them to a new and riskier strategy. By late 2016, the chicken consignments had drawn too much attention. Seizures in Birmingham and close monitoring of shipments forced the network to rethink. Their solution was not to slow down, but to change methods entirely. Instead of crates of poultry, they turned to the air freight system and to corrupt employees who could bypass border checks. The tactic was known as a rip and rip-off method. At Salo Airport in Brazil, insiders were paid to place packages of cocaine into the luggage hold of passenger flights bound for the UK. Once the aircraft landed at Heathrow, the same system worked in reverse. Baggage handlers at Heathrow were bribed to remove the packages before they reached customs, slipping them out of the controlled area and into the hands of couriers. One of the most telling incidents came when 3 kilograms of high-purity cocaine were removed from a Brazil flight. Surveillance teams from the National Crime Agency watched as an airport worker carried the rucksack containing the drugs beyond restricted zones. Outside Heathrow, he met Adnan Ahmed Malik, a Birmingham taxi driver drawn into the conspiracy. Malik's role was to collect the package and transport it north, keeping the chain of delivery intact. The meeting never went as planned. As soon as the handover was made, NCA officers moved in. The rucksack was searched, and inside, officers found the cocaine still sealed and untouched. Mick was arrested at the scene, the package secured as evidence. When investigators examined communications, they found that both Nazarat and Hussein had been in contact with Marek in the lead up to the handover. Calls were made during the critical window, attempts to coordinate, and then to reach him again once the arrest had taken place. The pattern of contact placed the ringleaders directly within the Heathrow operation, tying the airside smuggling to the same group already behind the chicken imports. This Heathrow branch was more than an experiment. It was part of a wider organised crime structure. Later prosecutions would draw in names from London and Slough, showing that the method was not confined to Birmingham, but linked to other urban networks. For the Husseins, it was an attempt to keep the flow of cocaine moving, despite setbacks in the poultry route. For investigators, it was confirmation that the group had access to contacts deep inside international airports, and that the conspiracy stretched further than the Midlands alone. After the Heathrow strand faltered, the gang reverted to the method they knew best. But by now, their options were narrower and the scrutiny far greater. To keep the shipments flowing, they drew in Mohammed Shahir, a 42-year-old meat supplier from Small Heath. His business became the receiving point for deliveries from the Netherlands, giving the consignments the appearance of being legitimate orders within the trade. In June 2017, another load was prepared in Rotterdam. On the surface, it matched the previous pattern. What the gang did not know was that Dutch police working closely with the National Crime Agency had already intervened. The consignment was intercepted before it left the Netherlands. The crates continued their journey, but the hidden drugs were removed. When the load arrived in Birmingham, the gang expected to find their cargo intact. Instead, the chicken arrived stripped of anything illicit. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, Wasim Hussein was on the phone to his Dutch partner, urging him to take drastic steps. Throw your phone. Throw everything. Throw the SIM away. It was a moment of visible panic. Evidence that the group knew their cover had been breached and their operation compromised. The investigation moved quickly. With the June shipment confirmed as a sting, NCA officers began making arrests. Wasim Hussein and Mohammed Shahir were detained in Birmingham. Shahir's role, offering his meat supply business as cover, was exposed, while Wasim's communications tied him directly to the failed shipment. At the same time, Nazarat Hussain was in the Netherlands. Dutch police arrested him on their side of the border, holding him in custody before extraditing him back to the UK. His regular trips to Rotterdam, once used to keep the supply line moving, now placed him directly under European jurisdiction. The collapse didn't end at the Midlands boundary. Dutch investigators pressed further, targeting those overseas who had helped stage the consignments. Shahzadbuk was arrested in the Netherlands and extradited to the UK in December 2020. The following summer, on the 10th of June 2021, Dominique Anthony Ventura da Costa was also extradited. Images from his transfer showed him under escort at Heathrow Airport, marking his formal handover into UK custody. Both men were later extradited to the UK, joining the case already underway in Birmingham Crown Court. Their arrests drew the Dutch side of the conspiracy directly into the same proceedings as the Midlands receivers, creating a single chain of evidence from warehouse preparation in Rotterdam to deliveries in Birmingham. The June 2017 sting had stripped away the cover story, showing the shipments for what they were. It was no longer a matter of suspicion or partial seizures. The gang's infrastructure had collapsed in real time. What followed was the full weight of prosecution set to expose every stage of the conspiracy. Alongside the drug trafficking case, investigators uncovered a separate strand of firearms criminality linked to the same network. At the center was Nazarat Hussain, already facing trial for orchestrating the chicken consignments. He was also charged with conspiracy to acquire a prohibited weapon, a handgun intended to bolster the group's protection and influence. Forensic analysis revealed that the weapon had a history. Ballistics matched it to 5 separate shootings in Birmingham, None of the incidents caused fatalities, but the pattern showed the gun had been circulated and discharged repeatedly within the city. Its recovery connected the drug conspiracy to a wider environment of violence. The firearms strand also drew in figures linked through the weapon circulation, overlapping with individuals already under investigation. It demonstrated that the attempt to obtain and use firearms was not separate, but part of the same organized crime culture. For the National Crime Agency, the discovery confirmed what investigators already suspected. This was not a group confined to importation scams. It was an organized crime group with reach into multiple markets, prepared to back its operations with a weapon already proven in live shootings. At Birmingham Crown Court on the 28th of November 2019, the two men at the top were sentenced. Nazarat Hussain, described as the head organizer, received a term of 29 years and 6 months. 25 years and 6 months were for his role in importing Class A drugs, with a further 4 years added consecutively for the firearms conspiracy. His co-ringleader, Wasim Hussein, was jailed for 14 years and 4 months, convicted on 2 counts of conspiring to import Class A. The following year, on the 23rd of January 2020, attention turned to those who had supported the shipments. Muhammad Shia and brothers Maninder and Davinder Singh Tharkar from Smethwick each received 2-year sentences, suspended for 18 months. They were spared immediate custody, but their roles in moving consignments were made clear. Qam Hussein, another man brought before the court, was acquitted of involvement in the organised crime group. The Heathrow strand brought its own convictions. Vaughan Anthony Henry from London was sentenced to 10 years and 8 months. Adnan Ahmed Malik received 9 years. Dev Anand from Slough was jailed for 7 years and 8 months, while Grant and Delano Samuels, also from London, was given 16 years for offences spanning both drugs and firearms. Other defendants were tied directly to the weapons strand. Khalid Subhan from Tottenham received 5 years for possession of a firearm. In Birmingham, Abid Hussein was sentenced to 6 years for conspiring to possess a firearm without a certificate. Finally, the Dutch arm of the conspiracy was brought before the same court. On the 22nd of December 2021, Shastad Butt was sentenced to 21 years and 10 months, while Dominique Anthony Ventura da Costa received 7 years and 10 months, 4 months. In total, the National Crime Agency confirmed that 13 people were convicted, with combined jail terms ranging between 98 and 129 years. But while the Midlands network collapsed, another drugs line was already running, this time between Birmingham and Gloucester, under the codename Operation Rockhopper. The network that police later called Operation Rockhopper was not vast in numbers, but it was structured with clear roles. At its head stood Majid Hussein, 36, from Smethwick in the West Midlands. He was the link to supply the Birmingham end of the chain. Majid had already built a history in Class A trafficking. By the time Rockhopper was running, he was still on licence from a previous conviction, but that did not deter him. From his side, the wholesale quantities of heroin and cocaine were sourced and moved into circulation. On the receiving side in Gloucester was his younger brother, Rajid Hussain, 35. His role was less about leadership and more about movement. Rajid drove back and forth between the two cities, couriering consignments and cash, and acting as the bridge that connected Birmingham supply to Gloucester streets. When police later intercepted him on the M5, the truth revealed. We will talk about this in a few minutes. The Gloucester distribution was overseen by 25-year-old Mizanur Rahman, also known as Sonny, based on All Saints Road in the city. Rahman acted as the manager on the ground. He took the deliveries, organised sales, and directed others who operated further down the chain. Police later described him as someone determined to keep the trade moving, despite his own past. In 2011, he was sentenced to 27 months for possession of Class A with intent to supply. Yet by 2016, he was again at the center of a Class A operation, coordinating supply lines into Gloucester. Supporting them were lower-level figures. Mohammed Safian, a 27-year-old taxi driver from Smithwick, admitted he had acted as a courier, though he claimed only a limited role. The court accepted his part was smaller. He collected, delivered, and knew what he was moving was dodgy, but he was not central to the conspiracy. Then there was Marius Cratian, a 23-year-old Romanian national living in Gloucester. He operated from a flat in Park End Road, which functioned as a stash house and dealing base. Police surveillance linked the property to multiple handovers, confirming its role as a hub for the street-level supply. Together, this line moved an estimated 600,000 worth of heroin and cocaine in just 4 months. Small in appearance, but structured enough to sustain regular trips, steady supply, and the constant flow of Class A onto Gloucester streets. By the spring of 2016, police in Gloucestershire were already picking up signs of a growing Class A pipeline. Reports of supplying Gloucester pointed not to local small-scale dealers, but to a more structured chain feeding the city from Birmingham. To test those suspicions, the Serious and Organised Crime Unit launched a covert operation. They gave it a codename Operation Rockhopper. The operation stretched over several months from May to September 2016. Officers tracked movements, built profiles, and pieced together the rhythm of the supply line. Covert teams followed vehicles on the M5, documenting journeys that fired drugs one way and cash the other. The patterns soon emerged with clarity. Between 18 and 22 trips were made in that short period, each trip maintaining the flow of heroin and cocaine into Gloucester's market. Technology and patience played a decisive role. Plain clothes, officers tailed convoys while static surveillance points watched addresses linked to the group. More striking was the use of covert filming. Cameras captured the handovers themselves. These recordings later became central in court, giving jurors a first-hand view of what was otherwise hidden activity. But physical surveillance wasn't the only window into the conspiracy. During September 2016, investigators intercepted a bulk text alert sent out to users in Gloucester. In the space of a single minute, around 200 messages were broadcast from a single phone advertising both heroin and crack cocaine, letting regular customers know that supply had resumed. By late summer 2016, the surveillance work of Operation Rockhopper began to yield decisive results. The first breakthrough came on the evening of the 22nd of August 2016. Police monitoring Nazarat Hussain tracked him as he drove his silver BMW down the M5, returning from Birmingham towards Gloucester. When officers intervened, they discovered exactly what the surveillance had suggested: 121 grams of heroin and 239 grams of high-quality cocaine hidden in the boot. What shocked investigators further was who else was in the car. Sitting in the passenger seat was Rajid's young niece, the daughter of Majid Hussein. A family trip was being used as cover for a significant drug run, stark evidence of how deeply normal life and criminal enterprise had been blurred. 1 month later, on the 20th of September 2016, officers closed in again. Surveillance teams had followed Misanur Rahman to the car park of the Greyhound pub in Longlevens, Gloucester. There, Rahman met a taxi driven by Mohammed Safian. Cameras captured him, placing a white bag into the vehicle and collecting another item from the rear seat. The moment was enough for the police to move. Both men were arrested on sight. Inside, the taxi officers seized 244 grams of heroin and 62 grams of cocaine, along with a shoebox containing £11,500 in cash. At Rahman's home, a safe held another £3,000 in notes contaminated with drug traces. Parallel searches revealed more of the infrastructure. At Marius Cratian's flat on Park End Road, Gloucester, police uncovered smaller amounts of cracked cocaine and packaging. The operation culminated weeks later on the 11th of November 2016. A warrant was executed at Majid Hussein's home on Queens Road, Smithwick. Inside, Investigators found over £15,000 in cash, some of it concealed in the attic. Alongside the money, there was drug packaging and equipment, both contaminated with traces of cocaine and heroin. It was the final confirmation that Marge's address was not only his residence, but also part of the supply chain. Ancillary defendants were also brought into the frame. Mohammed Safian admitted making 2 courier trips paid around £250 for each, far above a normal taxi fare, and enough for him to admit he knew it was dodgy. Marius Cratiun, meanwhile, admitted possession with intent to supply and allowed his flat to be used but failed to appear for sentencing. A warrant was issued for his arrest. Piece by piece, the intercepts, arrests, and searches dismantled the line. What began as covert surveillance was now hard evidence in custody. Drugs, cash, packaging, and confessions that tied each defendant to the operation. On the 25th of September 2017, at Gloucester Crown Court, the ringleader, Majid Hussein, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Before turning to the rest of the defendants, the court also examined the proceeds of crime. At a confiscation hearing, prosecutors assessed that Majid, his brother Rajid Hussain, and Mizanur Rahman had each benefited by $172,056 from the conspiracy, but the assets actually available were far smaller. For Rahman, police had already seized £14,550 in cash. For Rajid, the only recoverable item was a car worth £1,570. Majid Hussain had no assets at all, and was therefore given a nominal order of £1. Each man was ordered to forfeit what they had within 3 months, or face an extra 3 months in custody in default. The court also ruled that if they ever came into money in the future, further recovery could be pursued. Tension then turned to sentencing the others. Rajid Hussain was jailed for 8 years, though some reports listed the term as 9. In Gloucester, Mizanur Rahman was sentenced to 8 years and 8 months. Together with Majid, the 3 central figures accounted for nearly 28 years of imprisonment. The supporting players also faced judgment. Mohammed Safian, the taxi driver, who acted as courier, avoided immediate custody. He received a 2-year suspended sentence, was ordered to complete 100 hours of unpaid work, and fined £1,000. Marius Cratiun, the Romanian national who had allowed his flat to be used as a stash and dealing base, failed to appear for sentencing. A warrant was issued for his arrest, leaving his case unresolved at the time. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode.